Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with Miki Szikszai. Miki is the CEO of Snapper, and we go really deep in culture, business, how to work on a board and operate from a board, and the journey that Snapper's been on over the last 15 years. And so I really hope you enjoy this one.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Hey, what I really did appreciate though is you actually gave me the phonetic spelling of your surname, which right. I think I've been saying horribly wrong. I apologise for so many years.
Possibly, but I may not have mentioned it or noted it.
Yeah, so Szikszai.
Szikszai, yeah. So it's so in Hungarian, SZ is basically sounds like an S, and an S on its own without the Z after it sounds like SH.
Oh, right. There you go.
But Hungarian's a weird language.
Yeah. I love it. You know what I love about Nick is that he learns so many languages and that he's able to communicate with someone on their first day, whatever their language is, and enough to be able to converse with them.
It's phenomenal. And then he's probably one of the main champions of Te Reo that I've ever met. Yeah. Which is again phenomenal in terms of for someone who's just kind of going, actually this is part of the place, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. He's a lovely, lovely man.
He's a very huggable guy too.
Yeah. The first time Dom and I went and met him, I walked away and I was like, sometimes you don't believe everything that everyone's saying around culture and what they're doing and how they're trying to build culture. And you just believe every word he said. A really cool guy.
Yeah, and he's got a great way of calling people out. It's kind of in its own way. He'll go, look, I'm really sorry, but I just have to say this because otherwise I would be being true to myself if I didn't. And then you go, okay, well, this is what's going to come next. And but it's just completely genuine, right?
Yeah, I love that though. I love authentic honesty, and I call it sometimes abrasive honesty. And I have to tell people that want to work with me or are working with me, I'm very abrasively honest, and that's because I'm just trying to question something and trying to figure it out. And sometimes my mouth talks faster than my mind, and it's not that I'm trying to be obtuse. It's just that I'm trying to figure something out.
And it's actually okay to do that. Yeah.
I think, especially in this world that we live in now, being able to say what you mean or feel. So one thing I did want to ask you though is, Snapper's culture is very not unique, it's just completely diverse in terms of people, thought, abilities, cultures, everything. And it's just, you walk in there and it just feels like everyone is just a family. And is that something that you've worked on or designed or?
I think, yes. I mean, culture is obviously always a reflection of leadership, right? Yeah. In terms of how the tone's set and who sets that tone. So I think initially it came back as a bit of a pushback from working in corporate, where you could see this
telecom suited and booted.
Suited and booted, but also one of the things that really used to do my head in quite a lot was you'd see all of the values on the wall and what you saw on the floor was fundamentally different. And there was this big mismatch there. Yeah. And it's a big organization and one of the things is that trying to have consistent values and culture is really hard. Yeah. It requires constant care and attention. So is it deliberate? Yes. Yeah. Is it designed? I guess yes, but not to be a specific way, but to allow for specific things, for people to basically be themselves.
Yeah. It feels organic.
Yeah. It's not, I don't think it's staged but I think it is a reflection of just where you come from. And certainly in my case, I mean, I'm pretty fortunate to have a pretty diverse upbringing and sort of.
So tell me, let's start there. Tell me about that, because your parents were refugees, right?
Yeah. Look, the way I like to describe it to anyone who's meeting me for the first time, I'm made in New Zealand from imported ingredients. So it's a bit. I stole bits of that from Rowan, Simpson, who used a phrasing like that. But I guess, for want of a better phrase, I'm lucky to be here. I mean, my mum basically was orphaned during World War II. So her and her brother basically were evacuated from Poland. They were effectively on their way to Russia. And then effectively during World War II, the Russian-German sort of alliance broke down, and the Russians said, actually, we don't need to deport these people to Russia. You can go somewhere else for safety. A very long story short, the wife of the New Zealand Prime Minister at the time heard about them and said, we should do something. And so New Zealand took on 700
Who
Polish
was the
kids.
Prime Minister at the time?
Peter Fraser. So his wife basically had seen a news report, and a ship had come in on its way to, I think, to Australia, taking some Polish orphans. And she said, look, New Zealand can do its part here as well. So they were invited to New Zealand. Actually, I've got a cool photo which I'll share with you, which is basically of my mum and her brother basically arriving in New Zealand on the wharf at the time. And they're so the plan was for them to basically stay here until the war ended and then go home. So a Polish camp was established in Pahiatua. She was brought up by Polish nuns, but then once the war ended and it became clear that Poland was going to fall under the communist sort of influence, then the New Zealand government said, you can stay, you're invited to stay. So her family was her brother, who's just passed away recently, but basically all of her schoolmates.
Wow.
And one of the things that you learn is that, your upbringing when your mother is brought up by Polish nuns, it has some certain things that don't necessarily happen to other kids. Like you're certainly being sick. I remember as a kid being sick, and you talk to your mates and they'd go, oh yeah, I was sick, and mum gave you lemonade and chips, and I'm like, no, that did not happen.
What were you getting when you were sick?
We were getting nothing. Like mum was very much, she'd been taught, you basically starve, you starve sickness out. And so it meant you didn't get sick that often, really. There was no incentive to do that. Wow. So she basically grew up in Wellington and was in a flat in Marjoribank Street. My dad basically came out from Hungary in 1956 after the revolution there.
I heard your dad was a Hungarian football star.
Well, I don't know if a Hungarian football star, but he played for Hungaria, which was the local Hungarian team here in Wellington, so who basically ended up playing National League.
Oh, wow,
So
cool.
he was a very hardcore defender. Like I think I remember watching him a lot. There's some newspaper clippings we have of him, which are generally about him getting sent off for ungentlemanly conduct or foul play. But he certainly was one of those people who made sure the ball didn't get past him.
Old school soccer.
Exactly.
And did he follow Tottenham?
He did not follow Tottenham. So but I do because of 1982. Yeah. So I guess going back to my folks, I mean, it's a dad and his Hungarian mates had a flat around the corner from where my mum lived. Apparently, the Hungarians did great parties and they knew how to cook, and that was that. But it's a relationship that probably would never happen in their own countries. Hungarians are pretty xenophobic. Poles tend to keep to themselves, but it's something that worked here.
Awesome. And then yourself and your brother?
Yes, and then we've got an older sister as well. So there's three of us.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So one of the things apart from talking to your mates as you grow up and those kinds of things, like we had amazing food. Like the things that my parents always prioritized was good quality, tasty food. So things like decent coffee and those kinds of things, they would trade away other things for that.
I love Polish food.
Polish food, and Hungarian food's good too. Their cakes are really good. It's these are good vices to have.
So you grew up in Wellington?
So I grew up in Wellington. But one of the lessons one of the things I think I took away from their stories is it didn't really matter how hard things were for me. Things could always be worse. Much worse. And it's one of those things I think that just sort of sits there in the background when anytime anything does go wrong, because stuff goes wrong all the time, you go, actually, there's always going to be a way through this. It kind of engenders a sense of optimism, I think, that you can sort of get through most things.
I think so. And it's funny, like everyone I talk to on the podcast has stories that they can relate to from their childhood that have defined the person that they are today. And so, it's really interesting, like that methodology and that mentality of, we've had a pretty good life. We've got a pretty good life here. It could be a lot worse. Don't complain. And
absolutely. And sometimes make the most of what you've got.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about you growing up then. Did you know that you would be in tech?
No, actually. So at school, the things I was actually more interested in were languages. And one of the things that so while I knew a little bit of Polish and a little bit of Hungarian growing up, turns out they're not common subjects that are taught in New Zealand schools. So, so I did French and Latin at school. So by the time I'd finished college, I was the only student at St. Pat's Town that was doing both.
Wow.
It means you get the end of year prize, I guess.
Yeah.
But at that stage, I wasn't really keen on literature or English or anything like that. So the other stuff I was into was maths and physics, and that kind of ended up, I think, turning into. I actually wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah.
So
that's an all boys fantasy at some stage, isn't it?
My last year of school, I'm going to date myself here, 1987. Top Gun, pretty big movie at the time. So I applied for the New Zealand Air Force because they had university cadetships.
Yeah.
I thought, I'll go and be a pilot, and they said, look, you've passed everything that we need for this apart from your ability to fly.
Because you'd never.
No, well, they put you through all of the coordination tests around, do you have the aptitude to learn quickly? And it was pretty clear that I did not have the right stuff. They said I could be a navigator.
Did you ever learn to fly? Did you ever try?
No, and it was really interesting when I kind of look back on it. It was very much around the dream. Like actually the flying bit was all about, can I see the world?
Yeah.
As opposed to actually I really wanted to fly. So you learn these things. But that got me into thinking actually what are the options here.
Yeah.
And that's when I'd always been interested in computers. Like we had a Spectrum at home, which I'd noodle around on and thought actually maybe there's something in this. And so I did an engineering degree, which was electrical and electronic, but that had lots of hardware and software in there. And it was through that you kind of go, actually, I can see how this works. And the thing I really liked about it, I could see there was a bit there where you could be sort of in that translation role, where you could say, hey, this is what people want, and this is how you can put it together. But you didn't have to be an expert in both of those things. You could be a bit of a generalist, and that was what I really liked about it, and which is kind of the skill that I was sort of picking up on the language side of things is actually, can you bridge these two worlds?
Yeah. And so what was your first job out of university then?
My first job out of university was at New Zealand Steel. So I joined their university cadetship program, and so I worked for a year up in Waiuku, or I was at the steel mills in Glenbrook. I was living in Waiuku, which was, and it was crazy, right? They had this massive piece of infrastructure that would take iron sand and convert it into basically, corrugated iron and colour steel. And I was working in the rolling mills, which is the bit where you basically take these big slabs and you just basically roll them out and flatten them. And they said, all right, great. So day one, you're the maintenance engineer for the rolling mill. And you go like, great. Is there a manual? And they go, yeah, sure. It's in this sort of Japanese English kind of thing. You'll work it out. So that was awesome fun as a job, but a terrible place to live first year out of uni. You're kind of going, great, for the first time I've got some money, I'm looking to
party.
Yeah, exactly. And you go, and there was a good crew there, because they took on about 20 grads, so there was a really good cohort of people there. But the Waiuku Kozi Club wasn't really it.
It wasn't doing it because it
wasn't doing it.
So you came back to Wellington?
So I came back to Wellington. I worked for a year in a consulting engineering firm, at Kerslake and Partners, which convinced me I never wanted to do consulting because you just got basically the horrible jobs.
Yeah.
And then I was looking around and managed to get into telecom cellular business right at the time when they were doing all of their digital rollout. So they had an old analog network which they're converting to digital, and that's kind of what I really think is the start of the career, because that was working in an engineering group. It was really practical.
That was an exciting time at telecom, though.
It was an awesome time, and cellular was actually its own separate company at that point. So it was a couple of hundred people there to start with before it got rolled into the mothership. So you had loads of flexibility, and at that stage the network was exploding. So I started off as being responsible for the lower half of the North Island just for optimization, but they had a really clear path of once you master that, then you can go into the art of actually deciding where new cell sites should go and working out their locations and that was.
How's that an art? What's the art for that?
Well, the art for that was there was so much more people stuff there than just you sure you had to do your predictions around saying, hey, this hill's better than that hill, but ultimately you're then working with the property team to go, okay, here are our half dozen sites. What do we think is going to be the best site? What can we secure? where are we going to have the least opposition for these things? I mean, even at that stage before 3G, you're turning up at schools, to do a briefing, and you're going, okay, there are 300 parents here, and they all want to basically run you out of town.
Was there conspiracy 5G nuts back then?
There were people there who were basically spreading a lot of misinformation. Yeah. So the prime protagonist was a guy who used to be a meteorologist. So he was a doctor, but he would use that. And look, I think he was really well-meaning, but what I learned really quickly at that point is that while the evidence was not there, the fear that was created was totally real.
Yeah.
And you'd go and meet people in their homes and talk about this, and they'd be terrified. They'd be talking about lining their houses with, foil and mesh, and you're going, this is like having a microwave oven on top of a 20-meter pole.
Yeah.
There is no effect from this.
Yeah.
And even though we had we had a lot of health experts that we'd work with and those kinds of things, but I found I really enjoyed that people interaction aspect of it, and often sometimes you'd actually agree to disagree, but the most important thing was just to make respectfully make sure that people felt like they were heard, and often recognize that they weren't at fault here. Their emotions were real, and you had to respect that, and you had to find as many ways of saying.
How old were you when you're doing this?
Mid-20s.
Oh wow, that's
25.
That's a job for mid-20s. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we were. It was one of those things we were passionate about, kind of rolling out the network.
Yeah.
Because you're going, this is actually a really important thing. Like, you could see the benefit, but you could also see at that time. I mean, it's so much worse now with just how easy it is to amplify those things. Yeah. But you could see how people could get scared really quickly, and you go, actually, there's a job we can do here of actually just reassuring people that this is okay. Yeah. And one of the most powerful things was saying, the office that I sit in every day, line of sight, 10 meters away are a set of antennas. We've put them there because we think this is okay.
Yeah.
And that would often people would say, oh, it's just a big corp, doing its thing, and being able to humanize that, I think, is really important.
Yeah. It's funny how when you like you said before, fear is real, right? Like, and so you look at like a lot of these conspiracy theories and stuff that are out there now. Like, people have zero empathy for them, and we especially with what happened with the last couple of years with COVID and the likes, but people's fear is real, right? And if we can just get it back down to having these conversations like you're talking about now and having empathy for that side, I think people are willing to listen. And what I love the most is if I'm talking to someone that disagrees with something I'm saying, and this guy said to me a couple of weeks ago, he was like, you've really made me think. Yeah. And I was like, that's the best answer I could ever get from you, because it's like, it's my opinion, I'm trying to explain my side of the story, and if I can make you think about it and you can go off and look into something, great, but we don't have to agree.
Exactly, and I think that's this whole thing. Both things can be true at the same time. You can feel scared, and this can be safe.
Yeah.
And that's actually being able to hold those two things together, I think, is actually a really important thing. And because the world's complicated, right?
Yeah. So you seem to take on big jobs with corporations where you're having to change and influence, people.
Really, I listen to a lot of podcasts and people in their careers and how deliberate they were. I can only think of maybe 2 or 3 things that I've done that have been truly, obviously deliberate. And I think some of the rest of it is just around, this is what I believe and this is this is my value system and what I value, and you just gravitate to that. I think that's maybe that's just not being mature enough to recognize that. But
I think a lot of people have really good stories about why they chose after the fact, but at the time,
I could backwards engineer all of these stories. It'd be amazing. But
it makes for good podcasts.
But in the moment, often it's just like, it is probably down to what does your heart tell you, and being in tune with that, and kind of going, actually, what's the right thing to do here for me and for what I stand for.
Well, but you were at Telecom for a long time, right?
13 years, I think. 12, 13 years. Yeah. So that was a great place to learn a bunch of stuff. And it's probably one of those places where you can actually go in a technical role and actually come out with a much wider range of skills there. So, I mean, so the I mean, that bit that I was talking about was just the beginning. I mean, we ended up doing the CDMA network, which was the, a complete network replacement. And that was probably one of the times where I did make a deliberate change in role, because we had three of us who were leading that. I was looking at the radio side at one point. My mate was looking at sort of the IT systems, and we had another colleague who was looking at the marketing side of things. And I said to my mate, I know we both have these skills in these areas, but wouldn't it be awesome to swap?
Yeah.
It took a little bit of convincing. But I said, look, we can back each other up. If it doesn't work out, we'll go back.
Why did you want to swap?
I thought it would be great to get exposure in another domain, and because it was one of those things you could kind of see for both of us, we were going to get pigeonholed, and you could go, actually, you'd end up with two really good generalists at the end of this as an organisation, and it's actually worked out. Well, for me, I thought it was one of the best decisions
What does he do now?
He's the CTO for Chorus.
Well, it worked out for him
it's
too.
worked out pretty well. Yeah, he might argue it differently, but it meant that we both got exposure in other areas, and we were actually able to help each other out. But it turns out by the time you're at the nitty gritty part, you actually know enough about that domain yourself to be able to go, I think I know what the right thing to do is here, and you're kind of looking for a bit of backup on that decision, as opposed to, actually, I've got no idea what to do here.
So what did you finish doing at Telecom?
So my last role there was basically product strategy for something called Next Generation Telecom, which was going through the separation.
Yeah, that was when the Scottish CEO was around.
Paul Reynolds was around, yeah. And I was doing loads of travel up to Auckland at that stage. So it was probably up there 3 or 4 days a week. Ella, who's our daughter, was 18 months at the time. It was really obvious that this was causing significant strain.
Yeah.
Had a high quality conversation over a bottle of red wine, and basically, decided to chuck it in on the Monday, and worked out my notice, and then was an at-home dad for 9 months.
Awesome.
Which was talking about empathy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What about all of those hours in the day that you could be doing other things? Where are these hours, right? They don't exist.
I'm a single father, and trying to do anything on your own at home with kids is challenging. And any husband that's out there listening to this thinking my wife does nothing at home, walk in their fucking shoes, mate.
You got it wrong. Absolutely. So that was really good for us as a family. And then the Snapper role came up during that. Yeah. And it was something that was probably the other decision I'd made at my time in Telecom.
Was Snapper formed at that stage?
It had, yeah. So it was run. So Snapper was an Infratil idea, and it came about from they bought New Zealand Bus, and they looked at the ticketing system, and they said, we actually can't collect the revenue here reliably. We need to do something. Yep. And they had a choice whether they could just replace the system or decide to do something that was big and different. And because Lloyd was running it, he's going, we were totally going to do something big and different, and try and replicate Octopus in New Zealand. They chose the brand. They chose the initial technology provider.
Was everything based off like the Oyster card? Theme?
There's definitely a nautical theme.
Because even in Australia, what's it called in Australia?
Opal. Yeah. Opal in Sydney. You've got the go card in Melbourne. Brisbane. Mikey in Melbourne.
Yeah, Mikey.
Yeah. But there was definitely. The UK and London and Hong Kong started it. Yeah. So London Oyster, because their idea was actually it was a wallet. Yeah. And it basically it held valuable things inside. An Octopus because it's 8, it's Chinese, it's a valuable and lucky symbol. But those things have then obviously spawned a myriad of nautical. Yes. There's orca and walrus and there's a lot of them. Yeah.
So they approached you, or you saw the job.
So they advertised the job. Yeah. And so I thought I'll put my hat in the ring, but I made it clear that I was going to meet my commitments as an at-home dad first before I did that, which they were cool with. And so they were running. Snapper was running on just in Wellington Central at that time, so the hut wasn't done. None of those other. We had no parking, no taxis, none of the other stuff. And so that's when I started. So we're about 8 people then.
And yet again, there was a lot of pushback with Snapper in the early days.
Massive.
So you found yourself in another role. You had to go out and convince people.
Exactly. And sometimes that convincing was around saying, look, I know you don't believe us, but we're just going to do this, and then judge us on its merits, because you're having hypothetical arguments about will it be good, will it not be good. But when the bus operators are saying, hey, we are running services faster, we're collecting fares more reliably, when customers are saying, actually, this is much more convenient than a cardboard ticket. If I lose it, I can replace it. All of those benefits that you get from digitizing those things, came to the fore. And then I guess the strategic challenge at that stage was, how do you scale? And we've gone through a few, iterations on that, pivots, pauses.
Let's go back a little bit. So you started, it was 8 people. It was in development.
So Snapper was operating at that point. I mean, but it was at a very base level. So we didn't have any of the mobile apps. We didn't have any of the integration with taxis and parking. We'd just done the retail integration for Reload. So yes, it was
in operation.
It was new.
And so what do you do as a CEO that then comes in? Like, talk me through the process of where your mind goes.
It's really interesting. So where your mind goes is that you start going, wow, there's all of this opportunity. And then you go, so let's just talk to people and see where we're at, and go, okay, there's actually, we've got a lot to do to get this to a position where it's good before we start looking at the opportunity. So there's this temptation in the early stage to go, hey, this could be massive and we could do all of these cool things with it, but you realize actually that's icing and cherry on top of the cake. You've got to finish the cake. So that became really obvious within, I don't know, a couple of weeks. In fact, my first, and just even basics around like who your partners are. Like we had a partner that we had to basically fire in the first week because they were effectively acting as our call center intermediary. And unfortunately, we were paying them, but they weren't paying the call center staff. So, anyways, there's just those kinds of things. It became really clear as a CE that actually, because you're responsible for everything, you have to make sure that all things are actually operating at a good level.
And Snapper at this stage was just a product for New Zealand, right? And so
it was only a product for Wellington. Wellington. Not even the hut.
Obviously not what it is now. And so did you know what Snapper could be in the early days?
So we had a vision at that stage. Actually, the model was really clear. We wanted to basically be the national system. Because we could see in terms of the economics that was going to be really cost effective. But what also became clear very quickly is that a national system built by a startup team in Wellington. The number of conversations I had with Auckland that said, look, really interesting, but we're Auckland and you're Wellington and this won't work. And you're going, I hear you. Now, we're using the same technology that is running Korea, which is basically, so the core system that Snap is based on is basically provided by T-Money and Seoul. They're phenomenal. Like in terms of transactional volume, 3 days in Korea is a year of transactions from New Zealand. Wow. So there's no issue with scale or complexity or reliability. People say, well, what about backup? I think they know that they're in a war with their neighbours. I think they've got good backup plans.
Disaster recovery.
I think they're onto it. They're not ignoring the situation. But it became very clear that politics weren't going to allow for that. So we had to basically we had to change tack.
So what then?
So one of the interesting things that sort of was starting to emerge at that time, and I guess we always knew that we had to have options, and so we're doing a lot with mobile at the time. And so we'd developed the mobile apps for Android that allowed you to reload your Snapper card, and we'd work with 2degrees and the telcos around getting the Snapper applet onto the SIM card so that you could use your phone instead of a card. Like this was 10 years ago. Like customers are asking for it now. I'm going, we've
had it.
We've had it. But what we started talking with some consultants in other markets who are saying, this looks really interesting. And then they'd ask us, who built it for you? And I say, well, no, we've developed this ourselves. And we had a couple of consultants who came down and had a look, and they said, we've got a client in Ireland. We think they'd be pretty interested in this, particularly the reload side of things. So reloading a card turns out it's actually one of the biggest pain points for smart ticketing. It's actually, you don't want to go to a retailer, you don't want to go to a kiosk. If the bus is coming, you want to know, have I got enough on my card and can I travel right away? And it needs to work for everyone, not just people who have there's a part of the population who will say, look, just do it automatically. I don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
One of the things you realize when you work in public transport is it needs to serve everyone.
Everyone, of course.
And that means... and
some people can't afford it for it to automatically top up.
Some people don't want that.
Yeah.
Because if it does that, they're going, then I've got to make a choice about what I'm eating tonight.
Yeah.
And you need to recognize that.
Yeah.
So you want to put that control in customers' hands. And it turns out that this is something that's actually pretty useful for people. So long story short, the National Transport Authority in Ireland said, look, we think you can do this for our card. Are you up for it? They had a tender process. We submitted, were successful with a partner organisation there, and that basically meant that we had basically something to go after when it became clear that a national system wasn't really going to work in New Zealand.
So let me get this right. Auckland didn't want to bar a snapper because you're from little old Wellington, but the country of Ireland was okay with little old Wellington developers.
They were okay. And it was really interesting because they said the most important thing that you've done that no one else can do is that you've demonstrated that it works.
Yeah.
So they were less worried about scale and more worried about actually are you capable and can you solve the complexities? Because these systems they're complex, they're proprietary. Often you look at it through a lens of other like software and you go, surely it's just an API, and you talk to it and you go, no, you got to create those APIs and you got to reverse engineer what that system looks like to do that. It's a lot more like wrapping middleware around a banking system than it is, say, doing a point of sale software service.
And you're also, because like now you've got hardware products and software products and the whole kit and bit. Like I remember walking into your office and seeing the terminals and the likes now. So we've got, obviously we support all of the devices that are in Wellington on bus and rail. We've done integration with lots of other things. So you kind of have to sit in this middle between hardware and software and integration, and then still have a really good customer experience that wraps around it and an operating experience as well. So that was kind of at that stage was the bit that I was going, it was kind of a different version of the company. So going, I'm excited by that. And we tried to go after more cities like that who were interested, but it became also really clear that the lead times were really long. I mean, you're talking about 2-year contract cycles, which is hard for a small company. I mean, you got to take on a lot of risk in that regard. And at that stage, Infratil were also looking at exiting public transport. Yeah. So we basically put those aspirations on hold for a bit, and we focused probably our attention more on Wellington because Wellington was going through that whole changeover of the bus network around 2018. And there's a bit in there where we've established our grade program, and I'll get back to that later because I think it's a really important part of what we've developed. I think it's part of your DNA.
I think it is too. And through the process of Infratil selling us, we developed basically an analytics tool set for Wellington to help them understand how is the network running, is the right bus in the right place at the right time, and if it's not, what can you do about it? And that's become really where the focus of all of our offshore activity is now, because that's a much easier integration. I mean, you're talking about integrating with people's real-time data feeds, which are generally publicly available now. And they keep telling us we don't have a nice way of surfacing how the network works for everyone, whether it's someone in the C-suite through to, the bus driver operations manager who wants to show the driver, how you're driving this trip every day? You're missing these 2 stops. You need to, you don't take that left, you want to take this right. Or you're not logging onto the equipment properly, which means all of these people are being overcharged and we're having to reverse those things. So those become really, just impactful for continuous improvement. Yeah. Like you don't have to do a whole bus network redesign. You go, actually, here's the data that you need to make little changes every day. And that's where the focus of the company is now. So we've got our Snapper Analytics product is in prototype with 2 UK transport authorities at the moment and is going to be going live in March.
Awesome, mate.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's definitely you've had some journeys over your tenure.
Yeah, there's ups and there's plenty of challenges through that. And the one that I think about is actually, there's lots of business challenges, but they're kind of why we're here, right?
Yeah.
If you're running a business or responsible for it, the one thing you expect are challenges.
Well, you're going to know what you're getting into, right?
Exactly. And well, look, and even if you don't, you know that something is going to turn up that every day that's not expected.
Yeah.
But by far the biggest challenge, though, was it was in the public domain. So we lost our CTO in a plane crash, Norm Comerford, who we loved. All of us loved dearly, and I think just managing the team through that, or leading the team through that, was by far.
He was a remarkable man.
He was a remarkable man.
Yeah.
He was a remarkable man, and we've got an equally, if not more, remarkable man who's stepped into his shoes and has carried on his work. But I think it's the.
How did you do that? Because obviously that's something that's happened a few times with me with clients. You know. Because I'd work with Snapper during Norman's reign, and post and pre and post, and Angus and a few others, and it's such a shock when your culture is so tight. Like, how do you help your team get through that?
I got really good advice from someone who I really respect at that time. Well, I respect him, but at the time it was just the timely advice. He just told me what my role needed to be, and he said, your role needs to be the person who's putting his arm around the shoulder of the team and checking in if they're okay, and you need to make sure that someone's doing that for you. You can't get the team to do that for you. Your job is to be there for the team, and that's
sage advice.
And you'll find a way through it. And I was really lucky that the board, who were a new board, they totally supported me, which meant that myself and the exec team, which mainly Kerry and myself, because Mike, who was our other exec, was actually away on holiday at the time. It was a horrible phone call to have to make. Just basically were able to kind of, in the end, what you do is you go, what is the most important thing here? It's actually that people get through it, and it's the safety of our people, and it's allowing them time to grieve and recognize what's going on, and being okay to grieve at the same time. But still giving them hope and optimism that actually everything is going to be okay in the end. Yeah. And being genuine about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I was fortunate in terms of being able to do is I was able to use the lessons that Norm was teaching us every day as the way of doing that. Yeah. Because he left us a lot to work with. And one of his biggest lessons he left us, he was a master at going, well, we don't know what to do next, but we know how to work out what to do next. And just remembering that, and actually knowing that that's actually part of, your skill set, and actually that's the job to be done. You don't need to know, but you need to know how to work it out.
Yeah.
That was probably the most grounding thing, I think. And it certainly gave me really a deeper connection to him, but I think it also helped the team connect and rally around that as well.
Yeah. And was Norm responsible for the grad program?
It was his initial idea. Yeah. So that's why it's actually really important. It's and it was a result of failure, right? Yeah. So our first grad experience was a complete cluster, to be honest. We knew that there was value in having grads on the team.
Yeah.
And we took on a grad when we had a really small but really experienced team, and that gap was just like way too big. We had what I would call the classic early grad experience, where the old timers are saying, well, I could teach you, but it'd just be faster to do it.
Do myself, yeah.
And the grad going, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, and it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything useful or meaningful. I'm getting low quality work to do, and how do I develop? How do I even bridge this gap? Like, how do I see the path? And we wrestled with that for quite a while, and it was kind of just a coincidence, really. I got a call from Vic Uni saying, hey, we need someone to help us with our agile second year software engineering program, someone who's a practitioner, and Norm was really good at this. So he said, Norm, would be great for you to go up there and chat to these guys, which personally horrified him. Like he hated presenting. Like he was an awesome speaker.
He was good.
He was an amazing speaker, but as soon as you told him it was a presentation, he said it was like a bunch of switches got flicked and like couldn't breathe, literally stopped functioning, like went into a panic mode. I said, no, just go up and listen, just have a chat. And he came back from that and he said, like, we've been looking at this the whole thing wrong. We've been looking for fully formed people who are coming out of university that we can slot into a team. What we need to do is we need to look at a team of grads, because all that university is doing is basically getting these people to work in teams where they all have different skills they bring to the table. They know how to sort of approach a problem, break it down its constituent parts, do the work and bring it back together. And he said, actually, that's what we want.
Yeah,
and that's
enable that.
And that's super scalable. So and our first version was, it was typically, amateur and ham-fisted. He identified a team and he said, okay, we want you guys in over the summer, and here's the deal: it's all of you or none of you, and we're going to pay $100 an hour for all of you, and you guys work out how to split it.
How did they work it out?
I think they just divided it equally, right? I think what he was trying to do was just kind of incentivize. Actually, what's more important here is the team.
Teamwork
is the team, and we got them on interestingly, they worked on the very first proof of concept for the NTA in Ireland around the app, because we said, actually, we've got a useful piece of work that we need to do. And actually, it's something that we've got a little bit of time, but it's something that it's a real piece of work. It's not research or something like that. It's something that the customer's going to use. And they smashed it. Absolutely. And you could see within the first 2 weeks, we were just going,
something's different.
Something's different, but also this group, at the rate that they are learning at, you could see how they could go past our seniors.
Wow.
Not immediately, but you could see over time.
Just because of the collective IP that they're...
But just the way of approaching things. Like even though we had a small org at that time, we were like 25 people at the most.
Yeah.
You still had people, because it was small, they were working little silos. And if you've got a team that naturally just collaborates, that's superpower.
Yeah,
right?
wow.
And it was probably one of those things that made us realize that, and I get really angry when people talk about this. They go, the university system's not doing a good job, and education system sucks. And I'm almost at the point where I can respond without getting emotional about it. But I think you're just looking at this thing all wrong. It's like expecting people to come in and being able to sort of blend into your senior team is just a fundamentally unrealistic expectation, right? But if you have a team of people who are collaborative, they know how to problem solve, they're resilient, and they know how to learn, then you go, right, those are all of the ingredients. We can teach everything else.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And that wasn't something a lot of people were doing back then.
No, and actually not many people are
doing it now.
They're doing it now. Yeah. I still come up against companies who go, well, if only we could get better people out of the education system. And I think, and I've spent a little bit of time as a board of trustees at Ella's school, and you just go, actually, the education system is doing exactly what we need. Yeah. It's the businesses that need to change. You actually need to be a place where people can kind of continue their journey relatively seamlessly. And we're fortunate now because we've invested in that. And it is an investment for sure in terms of having people who can coach.
Yeah. But I think that's the problem that I see that most companies struggle with, is that they have that age-old problem, like you mentioned at the very start. The seniors are so busy, and then they bolt on with these grads, and they don't have the time to mentor or grow them, and they're trying to deliver to their project, and so then these grads get really unhappy, and their culture changes.
Well, they feel like they can't learn. Yeah. They're there to learn, right? And we're really open with grads who come in going, actually, you might find that this isn't for you, and that's really good. We should call that out soon, and let's get you into another place where, we had probably the best example of that was someone who said, look, I'm actually really enjoying the software development, but I've decided I like tax, and I want to go and be a tax lawyer. I go, we probably can't help you with that, but we can help you. We can help you find a place. That's a big change, but good to know that soon, right? And and going back to one of your original questions, what does that mean for culture? It means you can shape the culture, because if you're having to employ people who are senior all the time, then you're a taker of culture by far. But if you're getting people when they're at that learning stage and you're hiring for this collaborative skill set, and you get access to diversity, there are so many people out there that we could hire. Like, we are always turning people down at that grad program because we can only support so many. But there's amazing quality out there.
And you touched on this just briefly, and I want to extend this, is the coaching culture that you have. So I think in order to have the ability to hire these grads, that coaching element is really, really important. And so you have what you call like the domain coaches.
Yeah,
aren't they?
domain. Yeah. We actually Nick's named which I actually really like. We have schools,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
fish swim in schools, right?
Yeah.
So, but you have school leads,
Streams and
exactly,
schools.
exactly,
Yeah,
and
that's the Spotify model of chapters and guilds or something.
exactly. But it's definitely Snapper specific.
Yeah.
And when you come in, you go, hey, this is my primary school, but actually I want to nominate a secondary one as well, so that you can start in iOS and also have a secondary in Android or front end, back end, or whatever. And it means that basically then you're working with a coach who can say, okay, what are your skills that you need to develop, and how do we make sure you develop those doing the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of that culture.
Can you explain the coaches, like for people that haven't experienced this culture before, or this way of working?
The good coaches ask lots of questions.
But are they skilled in that domain?
They're skilled in that domain.
And they're working as if it's an iOS coach.
So they will be hands-on in iOS. And it's actually one of the biggest changes we had to make was actually changing those senior devs into coaches. So that meant they had to give up some of their hands-on work, which was, they were worried and fearful about that. But the benefit that we could see for them was going, well, actually, there's always more coming down the pipe, and you're going to have to learn more stuff. So the bit that they got excited about was, so I'm going to have time to learn complex technical things and not do it on my own time. And go, this is what we want you to do, because if that's useful and good, then you're going to have to share that with the rest of the team and bring them up to speed. So that was the quid pro quo.
Did that come from necessity because you've hired the grads and you had to figure out how to run with it?
It was one of the things that we identified when the grads first came on board, is going like, actually, some of these people where we've told them you need to coach, going like, I don't really know what that means, so I'm gonna just continue to do what I'm doing. No, you need to teach. And what it's meant for the grads is, of course, every person has a different teaching style. We don't prescribe a uniform style, so you can bring your own personality to it. So some will get up on a whiteboard and lecture. Others will say, what I need to do, I need to write some code and give you some sample stuff, and here's how you test it, and I'll talk you through it. But all of those methods are valid and valuable as long as you're getting your message across.
Awesome. And I think you've developed a really great organic culture with that. People feel very empowered at Snapper. I know Dom does a lot of recruitment for Snapper and adores it, because he gets to deal with all these coaches and managers that are just really just loving their job. They feel empowered to learn. They feel empowered to teach. The juniors are actually getting opportunities that they wouldn't get anywhere else. And so that for me is great culture. People feel empowered and feel they can be themselves.
I think they can be themselves, and they can make their own progress. And the great thing is, because that's aligned with where Snapper wants to go, it's like it flows.
Perfect.
Right? It flows. And it can always get disconnected. You can always see an opportunity for someone to say, I want to go in a different direction here. And you go, well, that's not in Snapper's interest. So we either have to change Snapper's interests, which will be a big discussion, or change your interests, or change. And that's it. Those are okay conversations.
Well, that's just life and business, right?
It is.
And if you're having that conversation, much easier.
Exactly. Well, when we first started the program, our sort of view was we could probably teach people for the first 3 years, and then probably it was in their interests to go somewhere else, because otherwise, at that stage we were pretty small. And you go, we couldn't necessarily see a path for everyone to develop into a senior role, but that's changed fundamentally now. We can see paths for people to move all the way through the organization now, which is cool. But it also means that sometimes we have people who leave and they go somewhere else and do something, and then they come back, and that's great too.
I remember being with a hiring manager once, not at Snapper, in another company, and I can't remember who it was, but it'll come to me later at 2:00 in the morning. And they said, if you ever see someone that's been through the grad program at Snapper, I want to interview them, just because they said they came out much more matured. They came out a lot more just aggressive about opportunity and pulling at string, and are able to figure things out and just be left on their own. And they'll come back and ask for advice when they need it. And so, that's obviously a good compliment to what you've done there.
Yeah, I think it's a compliment to what Norm started and what Nick's continued, and I think that's Yeah, those two guys have set, I think, a foundation there, which basically means from a tech team perspective, you've got, sort of a if we ever have a time where we're going, we need more people at scale, we know how to do it.
Yeah. And so, we talked that Nick is a lovely man.
Yeah.
Nick is a beautiful, solid guy and a smart cookie to be. And so I remember thinking, geez, it's going to be hard to replace, it's going to be losing Norm that way, and then bringing another CTO is going to be hard. And then I remember you hired Nick, and I was like, Nick, yeah, he'd be a good fit in there, but it'd be interesting to see how that goes. And he's just like, it's like he's always been there.
Yeah, it's that's what I love about it. It's like every time we obviously introduce people, he's gone through the stage of saying, "Hey, I'm the recently appointed CTO," but Nick is part of the fabric.
Yeah,
it's and he's woven himself and his values into the organization in a way that really works and fits. So
yeah. So on the coaching thing, how do you coach the exec team? Do they have a coach?
Well, it's really interesting. So people have their own individual coaches, but they're not. It's not a formal thing. So we encourage people to always get an external coach. Yeah. Always, or to find some way of developing their skills. So, and at the exec level, you should know where your strengths and weaknesses are and what you need from a coach. So we basically encourage people to find externals. Yeah. Because that's particularly at that level, you need to be able to say, you know what, my colleagues are, doing my head in or whatever, and that's okay. And then you can kind of go, great, I vented. How do I unpick that? And then that can take as many different forms as you like. So we make sure we provide time and space for that. And if they need to pay someone, then we cover that.
Awesome.
In my case, I'll talk about myself, is that one of the things I said to Infratil when I joined, that the area that I felt most exposed in terms of lack of capability was actually dealing with a board.
Yeah.
And I said, I think the best way to do this is to actually be on boards.
Yeah.
And actually
I was going to ask you about this.
Is actually understand that dynamic, and they were good enough to make time available for that, which is, there's been a real blessing, because I get to get coaching directly or indirectly from a range of amazing people.
Yeah, and so you've been an independent director now for quite a while.
Yeah,
right?
Pretty much since I began at Snapper.
Yeah. And so talk me through some, there's a lot of people I talk to that want to join a board.
Yeah.
And so should they join a board? And if so, what should they expect? It's an open-ended question there.
That's I can't answer the should they. So in my case, I knew that hands-on learning was going to be the best way to do it. Yeah. And I was going to be much more effective as a CE if I understood what boards wanted.
Yeah.
But then that's great. But you need to be able to contribute to a board. So I was pretty fortunate in that the first sort of board of a company. So I did Internet New Zealand for a bit, which gave me a sense of actually what it's like in an organisational sense. But the first board I joined was the Vend board.
Yeah.
So that was Rowan and Vaughan and me.
Yeah.
And actually, because they were at that stage...
Was Barry on the board at that stage?
No. So it was before Barry got involved. So that was, that 10-person organisation had just taken on funding, and Sam had said to Rowan and Vaughan, you need to have a proper board.
Yeah.
So our little internal joke was, the proper board is the three of us, with me not ever being a director before. But that was quite hands-on for Vend.
Yeah.
So that was so I could definitely contribute to that.
Yeah.
And actually they were looking for someone who wasn't directly in that B2B SaaS ecosystem, because they're going, actually, we need perspective.
Yeah.
And that was what I was able to bring. So being able to be really clear about what skills you can bring to the board table gives...
You were on the board that a long time then, weren't you?
Yeah.
Because you were there when I joined.
Yeah. So it was a good 5 years or so. And what a ride that was, right? It's, by the time I wrapped up, Vend was still growing, and that was when Vaughan stepped down and Alex stepped in as CE. So that was 250 people at that stage. So multinational was on a real tear, Yeah. And so I learned heaps from that, and hopefully have contributed a bit to that as well. So, But the most important thing I asked Infratil for was just time to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do a board, you need to invest time, and it's going to be a bunch of your own personal time as well. So Fortunately, I don't have Netflix addictions or anything like that, so I don't watch much TV. I read board papers instead.
Yeah, in your little cabin at the back of your house.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
We're in Eastbourne.
But I would, for anyone who's an exec role, I recommend it as a professional development. Because one of the things we got really frustrated about for a bit at Snapper, and actually one of the things that I'd put off for a while was actually doing the Institute of Directors course, because I thought it's going to be theoretical mumbo jumbo, and put it off for years and years and years, and then we started having some issues with how our board meetings were being run at Snapper. We're going, these are getting into the weeds the whole time, and then we went on the course and we go, oh, okay. The board eats what you feed them. So if we're having operational discussions, it's because that's what we're focusing it on. So we completely changed the dynamic of those meetings, always lead with strategy. Your operational stuff is there if people want to talk about it, but your agenda and your strategy is basically what you lead with.
Yeah. What do you want to see as a board member? What do you want to see? Do you want to see actions on what you've set?
There's the accountability piece is always there, but in some ways that's a given. I mean, particularly in an organization which is growing, ultimately it's uncertain, right? And what you want to be really clear about is what's known and what's assumed. Yeah. And for the stuff that's assumed, how are you turning that into knowledge? How are you either running the experiments or doing the work to basically say this assumption that there's a market that's this big and we can get to it this way. Well, how do we prove that?
Yeah.
Because once you've got that in a known case, then you're dealing with something that's much more predictable. That's at that sort of what I would call sub-100 person stage of the org. When you're past that, then you're going, well, how are you scaling and how are you maintaining cohesiveness through that? And actually, are you embedding your culture and values, or are you taking on new ones as you change shape? Those are the big questions for me around the board table, as opposed to did you do that action?
Yeah.
You can get tied up in the minutiae of that. I think it's and I think in B2B SaaS, there's so much uncertainty when people are starting that you're looking for just being able to separate that out quite quickly.
And how quickly should someone get aboard when they're setting up a startup?
I think as early as possible. I think that size that Vend was a good time to have a board, so that 10 people.
Yeah.
Because then you're starting to think about how do I get from 10 to 20, and you're starting to think about structures and planning ahead. I'm not a big fan of advisory boards because I think they really lack commitment on both sides.
Yeah.
So if you're a director, you're basically operating under legislation.
Yeah.
And that risk is increasing, and there's commitments you're making personally around, is the company in good health? Can it continue to operate as a going concern and the like? Whereas an advisory board, you can go, well, I think you should do this.
Yeah, I think the advisory board thing is a lot of startups can't afford, don't want to spend the money, and the advisory board is an easy way to get people for free, and they look good on LinkedIn if they're an advisory board member.
Maybe, but it's probably better to not to do it, because then you're just wasting your time, right? It's you'd be better off just focusing on getting to a point where you can afford to pay. Or, even in the early days of Vend, we weren't taking substantial fees. In fact, there's a bit of equity that was basically provided, which has turned out to be really good. In that case, but I think there are other ways of managing that.
Oh yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah, to me, it's just given perspective.
Yeah,
and a bunch of different experiences, which I'm actually able to bring to the table now for Snapper, which is helpful for us.
And do you, because I'm a big believer in boards, I believe in directors, and I believe that you should find areas that you're not as strong in particular on the board.
Absolutely.
So if you're a SaaS company that's never really done sales or anything, then find someone who's got a sales and revenue or sales and marketing nuance to them, or if you need more strategic, operation, find someone there.
Exactly. For the CE, they're basically looking for, and founder, you're looking for complements there.
Yeah.
The hardest job for the founder is recognizing, even though it's an interesting one. Like as a founder, particularly if you're a large shareholder, even though you're working for the board is working for you.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic that you just have to be really open about and navigate. As a Vend director, we're always really clear, Vaughan, if you want to fire us, you can.
Yeah.
That can happen.
Yeah, awesome. And so what does the future look like for Snapper, Miki?
Look, for us, really, it's it's really interesting. Like we had a chance to step back and think about actually what role do we want to play in the world. I mean, like for me, it'll be 14 years next week. So which is cool. It's a big chunk of my life, and it's actually where I want to finish doing my life's work if I can. And we believe in two things. We believe the amount of carbon that's going into the atmosphere is way too much.
Yeah.
And it's not only does it have to reduce, it has to reduce really quickly if we're going to have any chance of having a sustainable planet. Secondly, the other trend that you see, which is everywhere, is more and more people are moving into cities.
Yeah.
Cities are becoming harder to live in. I mean, even in Wellington, right? I mean, it doesn't take much to make things unmanageable and congestion to get, unbearable. We all know that if you have public transport, that it's really high level, that it's excellent, that you can actually fix both of these problems and actually move them fairly quickly. But we also know that not all public transport is excellent.
Yeah.
So our focus is on basically creating tools for people so that they can have an excellent public transport experience. The most important one of those tools is our analytics tool, which is basically all focused on measuring the performance of your public transport network. We think we can get that into hundreds of cities around the world. That's our main focus in terms of the organisation of where we're pointing the company to.
Yeah, awesome. Where do you think, like if you were to look internationally, where do you think, they've nailed public transport?
I think you've got parts of Europe that have done it, parts of South America that have done it. Canada as opposed to the US. I mean, London's public transport is great, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge with public transport now, particularly post-COVID, is it's nowhere near getting the patronage it used to.
Yeah.
Which means the funding's down.
Yeah.
And that's a spiral you want to get out of real quick. Because once funding is reduced, then you go, okay, then you have to cut back service. Once you cut back service, then people go, well, actually, this doesn't work for me anymore. They go and they buy a car. Once someone buys a car, you're probably out of public transport for 2 to 3 years. So there are some quite big macro level challenges there that are impacting on everyone. And I think getting to a place where you can be like these, and look, some of these Central European cities are amazing. Like you can be a Wellington-sized city and still have a really frequent, well-running public transport network where you don't need a timetable.
Yeah, I use public transport everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
It's just so easy to get to everywhere you need to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we just, Wellington people just don't seem to recognise that you need it as much. I think they're so used to just driving and walking everywhere.
I think walking does a lot of work in Wellington, which I think is really important. I'm a keen cyclist as a commuter because I think that's actually a pretty efficient way of getting around as well. Public transport in Wellington Wellington's always been the highest city in New Zealand in terms of relative patronage. Still is, but the network's under pressure at the moment. I mean, just getting drivers is hard.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a while to resolve those.
Interesting, mate. Well, it's been really cool watching Snapper's growth over the years. I think I met you years and years ago from with our mate initial sales, trying to get a salesperson into Aaron. I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And then it sort of continued and peaks and up and down over the years. But it's Snapper's a culture that I say to people. When we talk about real culture, I always say, look at Snapper. That for me is like a real culture because you can walk in there and anyone can be anyone. Doesn't matter what walk of life, what religion, what language they speak, what disability or ability they have, what gender, what sex, whatever. Everyone just walks around and everyone's just themselves and happy, and doesn't feel forced. And I'm like, that's for me what diversity and inclusion looks like, because everyone feels included. And so I think it's fantastic you've done that, and a lot of people, should follow in your footsteps for yours, Nick's and Norman's and everyone else that's been involved. But last question that I have, and I ask for everyone, I'm not sure if you listen to the podcast, but I sort of like to wrap up on what makes you happy.
It's actually really simple. It's actually being on a walk in the hills with my family and the dog. It's we've been doing this. We've started doing moving from hours to days. So last year we did the Root Burn, and we did Banks Peninsula. We couldn't take the dog on either of those, which was really sad. So I wasn't completely happy, but I was really happy. But it is just spending that time with family where nothing else is in the way.
Yeah.
You're kind of connected to nature. Doesn't matter what the weather's doing. And you're going, actually, I'm with the people that I love in a place that I love.
Yeah.
Alive on the planet.
How old are your kids now?
Ella's 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
16. So not many years left before that.
No, she's not. Actually, the conversation at home it's a consistent one between all of us going, we're really going to miss this.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Awesome.
But then you got to value it, right? And when she's the one who's saying on a Friday, well, what day this weekend are we going to go for a walk? You go,
that's cool.
That's
really cool.
Treasure that moment, right?
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Just on dogs, thank you for your patience while mine's been running around the studio, under our feet, table, barking, like drinking water earlier.
I didn't even notice, right?
But hey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast,
Awesome.
man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Troy. It's been a real pleasure.
Cheers, mate. That was a really cool podcast with Miki. I felt the whole way through that I was just chatting with someone who was just absolutely authentic about their own journey, what they did, how they've built culture, how they've experimented, the effects of Norm and what happened at Snapper. And so I hope you really enjoyed that podcast. Thanks so much for coming on, Miki. For those that are subscribing, thank you so much. This is how we're building this platform. And for those that aren't, please jump on and subscribe so that we can continue finding awesome people and telling their stories and help build their profile in New Zealand and the startup ecosystem. Until next time.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.